So this happened a couple years ago when I was 13 and my brother was 11. My parents had to go out and thought it would be better to leave me and my brother home alone, so that's what they did. They left, taking my little sister, who was 6, with them. My brother and I were all the way down in our basement, which is where we had our video games set up. So the two of us were just downstairs playing Mario Kart on the Wii. We had the home phone in between us, just in case our parents called. About an hour goes by, and the phone starts to ring. We look down at the caller ID, and it's our uncle. We decided to just let it ring. And how our phone worked, it would ring 5 times, then stop. 1 ring, 2 ring, 3. The phone stops ringing. And my brother doesn't pay any attention to it, but I do realize that the only reason to stop that early is if someone picked up, but we were home alone. I get really suspicious, and my paranoia gets the better of me. I take my brother and we go upstairs to see the phone is still there, but there's still a phone on the 3rd floor in my parents' room. We go towards the stairs, and what we saw chilled us to the bone. A man in his early 40s or 50s is all I can really tell you, because the second I saw him, my brother and I scream and run out the front door straight to our neighbor's house. We tell them what happened and they proceed to call the cops, then our parents. They come home fast and I don't know what's wrong with the man, but he never left the house. He just stood there. The police arrested him, and from what I heard he was placed in a mental hospital, but that's just what I heard. The story might not be as crazy compared to others, but I just think of what could have happened to me and my brother if my uncle didn't decide to call. So this has been happening for a year and a half now, and tonight something happened that finally made me and my boyfriend realize that I wasn't imagining things. About a year and a half ago, after living in my apartment for over 5 years, I suddenly started noticing that things would be out of place when I got home from work. Things that almost seemed out of place on purpose to mess with my OCD. Sometimes I would notice knives that were put back into the knife block the wrong way, or little ornaments that I have around the house being turned to face the wrong way. Sometimes my clothes were hung up in my closet the wrong way. Little things like that where I would feel something was off, but there was no way to prove it, and in all honesty, could have just been me being absent-minded when putting things away. After a couple of months of things randomly being out of place, and always having that creeped out feeling, things suddenly stopped being out of place, and I put it to the back of my mind and stopped being so paranoid. Moved on with my life. That is, until about 2 weeks ago. My cat has seriously been trying to tell me something when I had gotten home from work. Any of you who have a cat will know that exact meow. It's not the I'm hungry or I'm pissed because you have been at work all day meow, but more like a oh my god, you will never believe what happened meow, if that makes sense. I didn't really think anything of it because cats can be jerks sometimes, and I just assumed he was bored and wanted to complain. The other day when I came home from work, I noticed a pair of balled up socks that did not belong to me sitting on my bedroom floor. My boyfriend came over the next night, and I told him he had left a pair of socks here when he had stayed over on the weekend. He looked at the socks and said that they were not his. My heart sunk, and so did his. We both knew at that moment that someone had been coming into my house again, and that I probably wasn't imagining it the first time. A few days later, I came home from work and found a bag from a lingerie store on the top of my couch. It was empty. This bag had came from inside my house, as I had just bought a bathing suit from that store a couple weeks prior, and the receipt was still in the bag. At first, I thought my cat might have dragged it there, but upon inspecting the bag, there were no teeth marks, as well as the cat couldn't have opened the closet door and gone into the paper cardboard recycling that I keep in there on the top shelf. The final, and perhaps the most unsettling thing happened tonight. My boyfriend met me after work and we went out for dinner. We went back to my apartment after, and when I went to unlock the door, I noticed that it was already unlocked. Locking the door when I leave my house is one of the things that I'm most OCD about. I don't just double and triple check it, I quadruple check it. It is not just a habit I have, but something that is deeply ingrained into me. Everyone who knows me knows this about me, as I even do it to their doors. I have to check it 4 times or I get an icky feeling. Even my boyfriend was on red alert when he noticed the door was unlocked. We entered my house and I was checking to see if anything was out of place. He ran to the sliding glass door and tugged it. It opened right up. I never leave that door unlocked. He witnessed me locking it on Sunday when I closed the door because it was getting too cold. He saw me check it 4 times, and I have not opened it since. We are both convinced that someone has been in my house. Whoever has been coming in somehow has a key. The fact that they left the sliding door unlocked makes me think that they are planning to come back with ill intentions. But if they have a key, why would they need to unlock the sliding glass door? Unless they're trying to avoid the security cameras at the front door of my building. Either way, I've already ordered a security system, but unfortunately it's not going to arrive for a few days. Any suggestions on anything I could do in the meantime to keep safe? Also, what do you guys think? Am I just being paranoid, or should I go with my gut on this one? Update, changed my locks the other day and set up my security cameras. So far nothing else has happened. I haven't caught anything on the security cameras other than my cat doing his thing during the day when I'm gone. My landlord got back to me about the security footage from the front door and said that the only strangers he saw were buzzed into the building by residents, so no weirdos or previous tenants with a key. The police are still patrolling the neighborhood quite often, which definitely makes me feel more secure. I called the police this morning and talked to an officer who basically told me that, as for now, there's nothing that they can really do unless this escalates. But he did say it was right to call it in so they are aware that something might be happening. He also said getting security cameras is a good idea, as well as getting my landlord to change the locks. He also said that they will send a patrol car down my street every once in a while, just to make sure no one's lurking about. So background. I grew up in La Crosse, Wisconsin, a semi-small city with a low crime rate, at least back in the day when I was 14. It was such a quiet, nice city, and no one even locked their doors. People would say hi to each other on the streets. You could pretty much go to anyone's house for dinner, and their parents wouldn't get too nervous about it. You could walk home by yourself at night from your middle school basketball game without fear, which is what I was doing this particular night. It had been a long game and went later than normal. My parents both had to work in the morning, so they didn't go, so they could get to bed early, which is fine because they went to all my other games. It was about an 8-minute walk from my middle school to home, so there weren't really any concerns for my safety. So I'm walking, right? I'm wearing a pink sweater and jeans over my basketball jersey. My hair is a sweaty mess, but I was in a good mood because it was a good game. I was walking in a relaxing fashion, unconcerned and unaware, and that's when I felt it. I can't explain how I knew, but I just knew I was in some sort of danger. I looked around me, and parked near the blacktop fence was a Jeep with its lights off. I couldn't see who was inside, but I knew someone was, for some reason. I ducked my head and walked away from it, hoping that I didn't catch their attention. No such luck. The Jeep followed me. It pulled up next to me, and I saw the window open, and I fucking booked it. Didn't look back, just ran. I had such a negative feeling about this Jeep. I didn't stop until I could see my house, and I thought I was safe. Just as I stopped to catch my breath, I heard the engine rev behind me, and it was the same Jeep, tearing it down my street, beelining towards me. I was in a position where I couldn't run anywhere safe in time, because I was in a big open space near the road, so I just stood there frozen in terror. I was backing up, and must have looked every bit the victim with my sweaty hair and white face, because just as the Jeep pulled up near me and the door opened, some guy across the street yelled something. I don't even know what the guy said, but the Jeep's door slammed shut and peeled away. I didn't even thank the guy, which I feel bad about because he might have just saved me from something horrible, but I just ran home. I threw myself inside and slammed the door behind me, scaring the shit out of my mom, who was just heading to bed. When she asked me what was wrong, I told her, and she woke up my dad. We considered calling the police, But since I didn't have a facial description or a license plate, there wasn't much to give them. All I knew is it was a dark Jeep and it chased me. After that night, my parents never let me walk home from school again. A week later, the newspaper said that there had been a gang rape of a young woman at a nearby parking garage 5 minutes away from my house, and a Jeep was mentioned. Three years ago, I was living with my then boyfriend in a one-bedroom apartment in a little mountain town. It was a half-basement unit. The bottom of all our windows were level with the ground outside. It was an older apartment, and not all the windows could fully lock. One day, my boyfriend comes home from work while I'm laying on the sofa and immediately runs to the window near me and looks out frantically. He then looks out every other window in the apartment, then walks around outside looking in the windows. When he comes back in, I ask him what the hell was going on and why he was being a spaz. I think I just walked up on a dude looking in the window at you. He took off as I walked up. This was naturally very unsettling, but after discussing it and considering the time of day, which was 2 p.m., and the number of people out and about around the complex at the time, we came to the conclusion that it was just a curious neighbor or something passing by that happened to glance in. With that, we forgot about it. If only that was the end. For the next couple of months, odd stuff happened here and there. Someone would knock on the door occasionally, and when I would answer it, no one would be there. I'd find things in the apartment that I wasn't familiar with, or things like clothing items would vanish. I didn't really think twice about any of it until one night. My boyfriend and I were arguing around 1 or 2 in the morning, and were being a little loud. We were standing in the kitchen face to face. His back was to an open window with the blinds up halfway, and I was facing it. Amidst our arguing, I glanced behind him at the window, thinking I saw the reflection of my face in it. The window was open. It wasn't my face. There was a man with his face pressed almost against the window screen, watching us. Given the fact that we were arguing, and it was late, I thought for a moment that it might be a concerned neighbor walking up to the window to speak to us. A main walkway for the complex was right next to the other side of the window, so I spoke to him. "Hello, can I help you?" I asked a little aggressively, thinking that a neighbor was intruding on our privacy. He responded to this by staring, unwavering and cold, right at me. His face did not change expression. He did not blink or move. He just looked right at me, a way that I've never been looked at before, or since. In an instant, I realized that because this window was level with the ground, the only way this man's face could be where it was if he was laying on the ground outside the apartment, or crouched and contorted to look into the window. My heart sank. I buried my face into my boyfriend's chest and closed my eyes in fear. My boyfriend, up to this point, thought I was just messing with him. When I buried my face into his chest, only then did he say, "Is there really someone out the window?" I whispered yes to him. He felt my fear and took a moment before he turned around. By the time that he did, the man was gone. It was at this point that I started to think about the little odd occurrences that I had been experiencing, and I assumed the worst. I filed a police report with his description, and my brother loaded up my apartment with weapons to protect myself, or at least to inform this peeping Tom that I was armed. After that night, my boyfriend and my brother were on high alert. There were a couple of times when my brother came over that he saw a sketchy dude hanging around, and even one time he saw him at my window. He tried to follow him discreetly, but the guy took off running as soon as my brother stepped in his direction. The last night that I had an experience with this man, I was sitting home alone on my sofa. My boyfriend was at work at a restaurant about 2 blocks away. He had picked me up from work an hour earlier, and we had sat on the sofa together for a little while when we got home. Then he kissed me and left for work, locking the door behind him. After he left, I continued to sit on the couch on Reddit for a while in silence. After about an hour of me sitting there in silence, I hear the door creak open. It's a small apartment, so to see the bedroom and bathroom doors from the couch, all I had to do was lean over a little bit to the left. I assumed it was one of my cats coming out of the bedroom. So as you can imagine the shock when I lean over and see that the door that's opening is a door to the water heater closet, small storage space. I look to the right and see both my cats sleeping soundly at the other end of the couch. I look back at the door and it's still creaking open very slowly. It opens enough for me to see it. A set of fingers wrapped around the door, easing the door ever so gently to open it as quietly as possible. I ran my ass barefoot out the door, into the snow, and down the street to my boyfriend's work, where I called the cops. Of course, when everyone got to the apartment, he was gone. After that, my boyfriend and I packed our shit and went to stay with my parents. 6 months later, we moved 1,000 miles away from that town. That was the end of it. I initially found the sub around the same time I was trying to find other stories that were similar to mine, or people to talk to who had experienced something like I did. I had intended to write my story eventually, and I figured after this week's events I had to. I live 1,000 miles away from where all this happened, so part of me thinks there's no way this person could have found me. But last week, I hear a knock on my front door of my apartment. I was expecting a package, so I figured it was a delivery driver and didn't answer. I'd go get my package later. Then they knocked again and again. The third one made me feel uneasy, so I waited there a good 20 minutes to check the door. When I did, there was no package, no note, no nothing. Someone was just knocking. Although it made me uneasy, I didn't initially think back to my stressful experience in my last town. Then 2 days ago, I went out for groceries. I have a little patio, and I go out there in the mornings just to chill or check on my plants, and I've been known to leave it unlocked in the day on accident. Never thought it was a huge deal until I came home from the store 2 days ago and the deadbolt to my apartment was locked. This particular deadbolt can only be locked from the inside of the apartment, period. I assume someone robbed me because I dumbly left the patio door unlocked. I called my sister and I called my current boyfriend, which isn't the same boyfriend from earlier. I waited for people to be with me and I went into the apartment through the sliding glass patio door. Nothing was out of place. Nothing of value was taken. At this point, my heart sank. Nothing was touched. Nothing was stolen. Someone was inside my apartment just because they wanted to be inside. I told my boyfriend about my stalker, and he did not take this shit lightly, like my past boyfriend did. I filed a police report, and we looked for recording devices and cameras. He put a nest of cameras up all over the place, and we were on high alert. I truly hope that this was a coincidence, but if this man followed me across multiple state lines, there's no one on this earth that I'm less interested in meeting. After high school many years ago, I was in a bad place. My guardian had kicked me out after graduation. She didn't want to help me find a place to stay, so I lived in my car for a couple months. I met some heavy metal dudes at work one day. I had seen them around town, and all my other friends knew who they were. Everyone loved them. We became friends over a couple months, and they offered for me to move in with them. I agreed. Looking back now, I wish I would have just stayed in my car. My two main roommates were brothers, named Andrew and Seth. They were in a band. They also believed in occult and anything of that sort. I really never believed in that stuff, but I'm not one to tell someone what they should believe. They had let me live with them rent-free for several months, so who was I to complain? Being the only female in the house, full of young men, I was always looking over my shoulder. You never know who you can trust. Turns out, I was right to worry. Over time, their friends started staying with us for long periods of time, sometimes weeks. Their friends were another group of brothers that they had gone to school with. There were 5 brothers in total, but only 2 stayed with us consistently. The younger brother, Mark, was very polite. He cleaned up after himself and always helped out with the household chores. The other brother, Adam, had a laundry list of mental problems. He had apparently done some bad drugs back in the day, and it had developed into what seemed like psychosis of the religious sort. He had done time in prison for assaulting a woman with a Bible. He would often look you in the eyes and tell you he could see how you would die. Once, he told me that I was possessed by a demon and I needed my soul cleansed. Everyone else in the house knew he had these problems, but he was their friend. They helped him through the hard times and gave him a place to stay, otherwise he would be on the streets. I was always on guard around him after the things he told me. No one else seemed to be as concerned as I was. They should have been. One day, I was sleeping and my phone rang. It was my boss. He asked if I could come into work an hour early. It was only 12 p.m. I was broke and had nothing better to do, so I said yes. I got up and began getting ready to leave. I walked out into the living room to see Mark and Andrew sitting on the couch, while Adam sat on the floor by the TV. He was watching scripture videos on YouTube, some real end-of-day shit. That was fairly common, so I went about my business. I said goodbye and left for work. My work shift was almost complete when the phone rang. My boss answered and handed the phone to me and said, "For you." I was the cashier, so I assumed it was a friend that couldn't reach me on my phone. I answered the phone and heard a man's voice that I didn't recognize.
"Hi, this is Detective Williams. Something happened at your apartment today, and we need you to come to the station to talk about it."
I left work immediately. I assumed one of the brothers had been arrested for dealing drugs or something. I was very wrong. I got to the station and was buzzed in. An officer escorted me to a small, cold room with a camera. He gave me a bottle of water and left me by myself for 30 minutes. My mind was racing, thinking about what could have happened. He came back in and informed me that Adam had stabbed and killed Andrew at around 1 p.m. I was shocked. I had just left the house an hour before that happened, and everything seemed fine. I asked if there had been a fight. The detective informed me that there hadn't been a fight, and it seemed to have happened out of nowhere. I gave my statement to the police and left with nowhere to go, still shocked and confused out of my mind. Our apartment was a crime scene, so I went to another friend's house to watch the news report, since the police wouldn't give me any information on the case. Over the next couple of days, information began to be released. Adam hadn't just stabbed Andrew once, not twice, but he had stabbed him over and over again and nearly decapitated him. After the murder, he had ran down the road, still holding the murder weapon. He called 911 and informed them what he had done. I watched the news report in horror. We had known that he was unstable, but this? He had fully confessed to the brutal murder and provided police with his notebooks. He had apparently been planning to murder all of his brothers, my roommates, and me. He thought that we were possessed by demons, and this was his way to free us. Luckily, none of his other intended victims were there that day. Mark unfortunately witnessed the murder, but he luckily escaped. If I hadn't got the call from my boss to come in early, I wouldn't be alive today. So, to the man who brutally murdered my friend and wanted to murder me, let's never meet again. I was 14 years old when I had to live with my grandparents. I had to live with them because my sister was in college and my parents were divorced. They lived in an old bungalow type house. It was one story and we have stairs that immediately goes to the attic. An attic which no one really uses, just puts stuff up there. It's too hot and very stuffy. The sole window up there didn't really help. The attic had old creaky wooden floors that I remember that I had to polish with the coconut shell because that's how we do it here in the Philippines. That and my grandparents are very traditional. Anyways, my room was near the stairs leading to the attic. Like you open my door then turn right and the stairs are immediately right there. I hated that because every time I left my room, I would expect something to immediately crawl down from the attic. One night, my grandparents had to pick up my aunt's family from the airport, but because there's hellish traffic here, they had to leave at 7 p.m. and weren't expected to come home until 5 a.m. So, me, a 14-year-old girl, would be alone the whole time. I told them I would be safe here. We live in a gated community with tons of guard dogs. Everything will be okay, or so I thought. Before they left, we had already had dinner, so I was stuck cleaning all the dishes. As I was doing that, I could hear a bunch of neighboring dogs barking a lot. I didn't really think much of it because the dogs did that from time to time. When I finished cleaning up from dinner, I immediately locked every door and window and turned off all the lights before heading to bed. When I entered my room, the lights were on and it looked normal. My anime posters were on my wall, my closet was untouched, my bed was next to my locked, tinted windows. We had tint on them because I was on the first floor and my grandparents wanted to make sure no one would peep in at a young girl's room. They were also barred because my uncle, who used to use this room, always escaped through there to go to parties. This was my grandparents' solution to that. Nothing was out of place to alarm me. Everything was normal until I turned off the lights. As soon as I turned off my lights, a silhouette of a man illuminated by the streetlights outside. He looked like he had thick curly hair and a skinny build. I thought I was having hallucinations, so I turned on the light and he was gone. I turned it off again and he was back. On, gone, off, gone. I sighed in relief. I was just tricking myself out, I guess. Or something else was casting a shadow. I double-checked the lock on my door just to be safe. One with a doorknob lock, and one of those door latch type locks. I tucked myself in. It was hard to fall asleep when a lot of dogs were barking outside. They weren't our dogs, it was the neighbors. But as I was finally falling asleep, I heard something from above me moving. Something in the attic. I pushed down the thought. I'm tricking myself again. I hugged my pillow. It's just the rats, I said to myself. These rats seemed heavy and were also pushing furniture around. My heart sank when I heard them hurriedly go down the stairs and stop at the bottom. I covered myself with a blanket and waited for something. I was also wishing my parents would have given me a phone at a time like this. Suddenly, I heard the doorknob gently fiddled. I wanted to vomit when I heard a click, followed by a quiet turn of the knob. The knob turned, but it didn't budge. When they noticed, they tried to push through. This time, I finally stood up, shaking. I was a kid home alone with no phone, no means of defense. All that was saving me was this thick door from the old days. I softly pushed my body up against the door and locked everything up again. I didn't want to make a sound. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want him to know I was there. I don't know why he stopped, but he did. I didn't go back to bed. I just sat there by the door, waiting. It felt like forever. I heard footsteps go up the stairs, but I just sat there. I saw something move in the corner of my eye. There, out the window, the shadow was back. I forced myself not to look. All I could think was, thank God they're barred. I don't remember what happened after that. I think I fell asleep, or I was too scared to even think straight. I just remember the next day, my family and I were having breakfast. I casually brought it up to my grandfather. I think I heard footsteps in the attic last night. My grandmother scoffed. It's probably rats. I've never brought it up again. I don't want to worry them. But I do know this. Our dogs were caged up near the gate and were far away from my room, so they wouldn't have seen anything. The only dogs who were near my room were the neighbors. Also, there was nothing outside of my window that could cast a shadow that looked like a man. Lastly, the attic window was open. I've been wanting to share this story for a while, so here it goes. In 2007, when I was 12 years old, my family took a trip to Key Biscayne, Florida, with some of my cousins and family members. Naturally, while at the resort, my cousins and I would all hang out at the kids club, where there were always a bunch of kids to hang out with, epic chicken fingers and ranch dressing, and fun games for us to play. There was this director of the kids club who watched us and facilitated the activities. His name was Dan. In retrospect, Dan was a major fucking creep. He was around 40 years old, super tall and skinny, and was balding badly. The worst part is, sometimes he had us call him Dan, the Animal Man. Side note, these sort of memories leave me in awe of how naive and blinded I was to danger as a kid. If I ever met this guy now, I literally wouldn't want to get within a 5-foot radius of him. And there I was, as a 12-year-old, thinking he rocked. Time is a wonderful thing. Anyhow, I digress. It was made clear to all of us that for unknown reasons, Dan was leaving the hotel in a week. None of this fazed me. One of our last day at the hotel, I lost my cell phone. It was a bright blue chocolate cell phone. I quickly told my parents that I couldn't find my phone, and considering it was already the second phone I lost that year, my mom yelled at me and told me that if I didn't find it, I would be grounded. I hurriedly ran around the hotel looking for my phone, and along my way I went to the kids club to see if anyone found it. The room that was typically busting with kids was eerily quiet and empty. Dan was sitting on the couch all by himself. "Hey Dan, did you by any chance see my phone?" Dan responded, "Yes, I found it and put it in the lost and found in the basement. Come with me." Thinking absolutely nothing of this, I mindlessly followed behind Dan as he led me around the back of the hotel. We walked for about 3 minutes and arrived at the foot of a stairwell going into the basement. We were standing at the back of the hotel in a strange area, and there was no one else in sight. "It's down here?" I asked, confused. I was staring down a long flight of stairs, leading into absolute darkness. The walls were made of unpainted concrete, and it looked no more than a storage area, let alone a basement with a lost and found. Dan nodded and held the door open for me, motioning for me to head down the steps. Something in my 12-year-old self suddenly woke up. I'm not sure if it was instincts, fear, or fucking luck, but I immediately knew I had to get the hell out of there. Before Dan could say anything, I blurted out, "Never mind, I think I left it with my mom," and darted away from the stairwell and back to the hotel lobby. I was so shooken up because something about the situation didn't feel right. I knew he was going to hurt me, and as a kid who wore rose-colored glasses and was overly trusting of others, this really meant something. I tried to compose myself and figured I'd investigate a little bit more. I walked up to the concierge of the hotel and asked him where the lost and found was, because I had lost my phone. The nice woman at the front desk told me that the lost and found was right there, at their desk. She then asked me what kind of phone I lost, and after I told her it was a blue chocolate flip phone, she smiled and pulled it out from the box under her desk. "Someone turned it in earlier," she said, and handed me my phone. "Wait, you're telling me the lost and found isn't in the basement?" I stammered. "No, sweetie, the hotel is under construction, and the basement is being rebuilt. There's no electricity down there, or anything yet." This scared the absolute shit out of me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this man was dangerous. At the time, I was sharing a hotel room with my cousins, and she was the only person I told. Considering that she was 8 at the time, I think I really freaked her out. Now I'm 26, and I still think back to that moment and wonder what would have happened if I went down to the basement with Dan, the animal man. It feels truly like one of the most critical junctures of my entire life, and I'm so happy I knew to get the hell out of there before it was too late. I recently contacted the hotel to inquire about the past kid club employee named Dan from 2007, just to see if he was still around, or on a sex offenders list, or in jail. I even told the HR this whole story, but they still refused to give me any information about him, and it sounded pretty sketchy about it. We'll continue to do research, and if I find out any more information, I'll add it to the post. After reading through some of the human trafficking stories on here, I can't help but feel incredibly uneasy. My heart is racing at the thought of what I may have avoided. Long post, but it's worth it. For reference, my boyfriend is 6'3" and 275 pounds. He's very stocky, has a military-style haircut, usually wears a shirt with guns on it in some way, and has a fierce beard. This is important to this story. About 3 years ago, my boyfriend and I moved into a house with a couple of roommates near downtown in a big city of Michigan. I sent him to the store to get some staples while I started unpacking. He texted me just after getting to the store saying he had the weirdest thing happen in the parking lot, but that he would tell me when he got home. 10 minutes later, he texted me again saying that he was super creeped out and jokingly said,
"If I'm not on my way in 5 minutes, send help."
This is normal for his kind of humor. When he got home, he told me that he was on his way from the parking lot and a man stopped him, offering compliments on his beard. It happened a lot, so he didn't think much of it. The guy was dressed as if he was a lawyer or a real estate agent, with nice shoes on and a watch. Very clean cut, so he wasn't uncomfortable. He said thanks and began walking inside. The guy continued walking with him, asking him where he was from, what he did for a living, and if he had kids or a wife. My boyfriend's gut lit up like fireworks. After working in mental health, he knew to trust it. He made up some answers and told him to have a nice day. The man said, "If you're ever interested in a new line of work, you're just the guy I'm looking for." My boyfriend continued walking without responding and didn't look back. A few minutes into his shopping, he noticed that the same man was appearing in the same aisles as him, but would then turn around and go the other way. At one point, when he texted me, he was sure that the man had snapped a photo of him from the other end of the aisle. We both commented on the craziness and said, "That's some trafficking shit," but let it go, as it was over now, not really wanting to believe it. Days later, we run to the store to pick up some late night snacks. We parked the car what felt like miles away from the store. My boyfriend's the worst. And we began walking in. Thankfully, I don't really startle easily when we're out together, because we both have concealed carry, so I know if someone was attacking either of us, we're decently prepared. But I still jumped when a man's voice yelled out my boyfriend's name and added, "and his wife." My boyfriend said, "Keep walking," and didn't hesitate. Thankfully, I knew what he meant, and I hauled my ass into the entryway of the store, and I watched them talk while watching out for suspicious people or cars around them. When they were almost inside, I went into the store and started chatting with the greeter, so he didn't get the chance to talk to me. The man again showed up in the aisles that we were in, and at one point, looked to be texting on his phone, but was holding it up in front of him. I was almost positive that he was taking a picture of us. We didn't finish getting snacks and just left the store. I waited with the greeter as my boyfriend got the car, so I didn't have to walk through the dark parking lot. I've been a powerlifter at that point for a little over a year and was in great shape. I was in the gym every day at the same time due to my work schedule, and usually had my girl roommate with me, but today I was alone for a quick and light lifting session. I wasn't a minute into my gym time when the same guy walked in. I had never seen him there before, and instantly felt like vomiting. I texted my boyfriend, but he was away for the military, so he was panicking from a distance.
Remember your training and keep your cool.
He wasn't in gym attire and didn't have a bag with him. We were also in the gym furthest from the area that we live in. They had the best equipment for my personal needs and gains, so I'm not sure why he had chosen it, as he didn't have the "I love the gym" vibe. He came over and said hello, and I politely said hello back, but didn't continue the conversation. He said a few more things, and a guy a few machines over could tell that I was uncomfortable. He came over and pretended to be my friend, asking if I was ready to go. I said yes, and that I just needed to grab my things. The creeper man asked where my husband was, and I pretended not to hear him as I kept walking. When I came out, he was gone, but my new best fake friend was waiting at the bench outside the locker room. He said that the man had left, but he had let the staff know what happened, and they said that he wasn't even a member, but said he was there to pick up his girlfriend. My new best friend walked me to my car, and I switched gyms. Thankfully, we now live far, far away from this city, and I've never had an encounter with him, and neither has my boyfriend. I honestly believe that they were trying to recruit him to make big money selling women, and that I was just a bonus woman to sell. Thank God for strangers who stand up and save women. You will never realize just how important you are. Let's call her Sam. All throughout high school, and even a bit afterwards, we were best friends. Even though we were best friends, I felt like I didn't really know her, if that makes sense. We were pretty wild teenagers, drinking, smoking, hanging out with older guys. Sam always dated super sketchy guys. When we were 16, Sam started dating a 27-year-old named John. Disgusting, I know. I had my fair share of dating guys way too old for me as well, so I didn't really see anything wrong with it at the time. Also, predators have a sketchy way of making you feel like there's nothing wrong with what they are doing. I had my fair share of trauma due to older men from that time in my life, but that's a story for another time. She didn't have a car at the time, so she would regularly ask me to drop her off at places to hang out and cover for her for mom contacting me, because this relationship obviously was hidden from her mom. Being a teenager, I was like, sure, whatever. She's my homegirl, and she would do the same thing for me. Plus, I met John several times before, and he seemed decent enough at the time. Please keep in mind, I was also a teenager at the time, and obviously now realize that he's a predator and that it was wrong. He would give us alcohol and stuff, and would invite us over to party with him and his equally disgusting friends. Their relationship seemed fine at first, but turned toxic within a few months. I mean, duh, he was a grown man manipulating a little girl. He would constantly demand to track her phone location and control what she wore. He also cheated on her multiple times, but she always stayed. During the time that this happened, I stopped driving her to see him. One time, she called begging me to drive her over, and I said no. She went on to explain that he was drunk, and if I wouldn't, then he would pick her up, and if they got into a crash due to drunk driving, it would be my fault. So I ended up driving her to his house. I was furious with John at this point for hurting my best friend and had a rebellious teenager give no fucks attitude. So as soon as I walked into his house to drop Sam off, I started screaming at him for being a manipulative piece of shit. His response, and the dark, twisted yet emotionless look in his eyes, still gives me chills to this day. I could break your neck so easily. Thankfully, I was standing right by the front door, so I ran out to my car immediately and sped off. The next couple of years were kind of fuzzy. Also, I asked Sam to stop talking to me about John because I was sick of hearing about him. Basically, they were constantly breaking up and getting back together. Sam dated a string of other guys, but would always cheat on them with John. When we were 18, this is when things started getting progressively weirder, and I started to distance myself from Sam because of it. Long story short, Sam had a new boyfriend who she seemed crazy about, and I was relieved because she finally seemed over John. Then, she heard through the grapevine that John was engaged, and she became irate. We were hanging out when she heard the news, and she was like, I just have to go home and process this. She immediately left, and I was like, whatever, I'll give her space. She calls me a few hours later, and is talking super fast and laughing a lot. I was like, you good? She was like, yeah. I just broke into John's apartment and smashed all of his shit. I know I have this new guy I'm dating, but I've been hooking up with John still. Don't hate me, and I'm sorry I didn't tell you. But anyway, I feel great. I broke his TV and cut up his sheets. Too bad John and his fiancée weren't home. I'd never seen her act like this before, and I was so alarmed. What would she have done if they were home? The break-in was never reported to the police because she told John it was her, and if he went to the police, John's fiancée would have likely found out that he was cheating on her with Sam. Now at this point, a smart person would have completely cut her off, but I didn't. I stopped hanging out with her as much, and we naturally grew a bit distant because I had moved across the country for college. But we would text or FaceTime every couple weeks. So at this point, you're probably thinking, okay, so what about the murder? Hang tight, we're almost there. In 2018, John's fiancée was found dead. The police immediately ruled it a suicide because there was a note, and the gun was found in her hand. All of her friends and family insist that she would never do that. I know this because I have a few mutual friends with his fiancée, and it was understandably that that's all they would talk about. She was known to everyone as being extremely positive and cheerful. They pressured the cops to investigate more, and lo and behold, 1 year later, John was found guilty of murdering her. He's currently in prison, and it chills me to the bone knowing that I was in his house on multiple occasions and used to frequently hang out with him. So now moving on to why I think my friend may have had something to do with it. Last year, she was visiting my city and asked to meet up for dinner. I was like, sure, why not? We're gonna be in public, and I do miss her, and it would be nice to catch up. While we were at dinner, she had her phone on the table, and I saw a call from the name Jail ringing on her phone. She quickly excused herself to take the call, and was gone for a couple minutes. When she got back, I was like, what the fuck? She explained that she visits John in prison regularly, and they talk on the phone almost every day. I was like, why? He was found guilty of murder. Why would you want anything to do with him? She looked me dead in the eyes with a look of pure evil and malice and said, I'm the only one who knows what actually happened. No one else knows the truth. I quickly changed the subject, finished my dinner real quickly, and made an excuse to leave. I was terrified at this point and had no idea what she was capable of. I hightailed it back to my apartment and blocked her on everything and haven't spoken to her since. I know this isn't solid proof that she was involved, but her past behavior, the break-in, coupled with the chilling comment and the fact that she regularly visited a convicted murderer in prison, leads me to believe that she has something to do with it. At the very least, she knows more than she's admitting. Sam, let's never fucking meet again. This didn't happen to me, but a close friend of mine. He told me the story a few hours ago, and I wanted to share it here, since I don't think he has a Reddit account. For the purpose of the story, I'll call my friend Jordan. Anyways, he lives in Hayward, and was attending a march for the Black Lives Matter movement, at around 4 p.m. I think. I don't know what street or anything specific like that. He had just sent me a couple videos of the crowd marching and taking a knee. So after about 10 minutes, he said that they were passing through a street lined with shops and alleyways. There was an older man sitting on the curb by one of the alleyways, watching the march. Jordan describes the man as looking in the upper 40s, wearing a black and white flannel shirt and jeans with a cap. Jordan had the misfortune of walking nearby said alley, and the man stopped him, saying something along the lines that he needed help fixing his passenger seat since the recliner handle was broken and it was a two-person job to get it back into its upright position. The man gestured towards his car. It was a black Chevy Malibu that was parked possibly in the most sketchiest part of the alley, right towards the back, kind of hidden behind the trash dumpster. Jordan declined and quickly walked away before the man could say anything else. Now for his sake, I wish the story ended there, but I wouldn't be posting it if it had. I think sometime later, like an hour maybe, Jordan decided to start heading home while the march continued. He said he was cutting across some field that was between houses where only two other people were in sight. As soon as he emerged on the other side, his air was suddenly cut off as a thick arm wrapped around his throat and began aggressively yanking him backwards. Of course, Jordan yelled as loud as he could, and thankfully, the aforementioned two guys began to rush to his aid, shouting at Jordan's attacker. The guy let go and pushed Jordan. As Jordan stumbled forward, he spun around and saw that it was the guy who had asked him for help with his car. He hopped into his Chevy Malibu and sped off. The other two people asked Jordan if he was okay and comforted him and whatnot. Keep in mind, Jordan only told me this in a few texts, and I haven't got a chance to talk to him about it, so some details were spared. I think Jordan contemplated calling the police, but didn't think it was worth it. He told me that they were probably already busy enough, and he might be ignored, or have an extremely long response time, to which the only information he had was a description of the guy and the car. He hadn't got the license plate number. Jordan then went home, and that's pretty much all he's told me so far. It might sound cliche, but please everyone, stay safe. These are terrible times, and with all the looting and protests, stuff like this is bound to happen. A few years ago when I was 17, I was at a county fair. It was around 11 at night, and I was standing there with my friends, talking and eating. To understand what happened next, you have to understand it was crowded and loud. An older man approached me and told me a lady needed my help. I moved away from my friends to try to hear what he was saying. We were near one of the exits to the parking lot. The man walked me to the exit, but I wouldn't exit with him. The whole parking lot was dark, packed full of cars, and there was no people out there. He was pointing out to the parking lot and trying to rush me, frantically saying, "She's over there. Hurry, she needs your help." I kept asking, Where? I don't see anyone. I couldn't even see far because all the large trucks and vans blocked the view of the whole lot. The man said, "She's behind that car," and started pulling my arm. I wouldn't let him pull me and said, "No, I can't see anyone." Then he pointed to the opposite direction of the parking lot and said, "Over there." I looked. The only person I could see off in the distance was someone pushing a big cart with trash bins on it. And I said, "That's someone who works here." Then I walked away from him really fast and went back into the fair. My friends asked me where the heck I went. They didn't even see me leave. When I told them, everyone was tripping out that I almost got kidnapped. It was embarrassing. I felt really stupid. It's so creepy to imagine what could have happened. I thought that was only something I had to worry about when I was little. I don't want to meet him again, and sometimes think about anyone else who has met him in similar situations, and it worries me. When I was 13, my family moved from a village to a city. The city had a fairly high homeless rate, so of course, there was a lot of people looking for somewhere to stay. So there's that old family friend who runs a leasing agent who lets me use some of the unoccupied houses as sort of a recording studio. I record music in my spare time, as long as I keep it clean, and clear out and make myself scarce for a while when there are viewings, and it works fine for me. So one of the houses on the outskirts of a city I was in for a while, about 2 years back, had a weird lock. Sometimes it would lock properly, and sometimes it wouldn't. So one night, around 8, I lock up and started cycling back home, which at this time took about 40 minutes. So I was home about 9:45. I started to play my PS4. About an hour later, I realized I forgot my wallet. So I cycled back, got my wallet, and decided to check the rooms, just because I hadn't locked the door properly. So I go upstairs and open one of the rooms. Lo and behold, there was a man, maybe in his mid-30s, laying on the bed, as if he owned the home. Both of us just looked at each other, startled. I guess we came to some sort of non-verbal agreement, and I showed him out. Creepy shit. So random homeless guy, I wouldn't mind meeting to hear your story. Just not at midnight in a house you're not supposed to be in. This isn't scary per se, but it's always creepy when someone that you've known forever and thought of like a mentor is revealed to be something much, much different. So, I had this boss, who I'll call Mike, and he had to come in to fill in for a few months while my regular boss was on maternity leave. He was pretty amazing. He inspired me to work harder and even ended up promoting me. The two of us, and a third employee that I'll call James, were always working shifts together. It was fun, just laughing and kicking ass because we all had a similar sense of humor, and James and I were definitely the best employees there. After Mike's time to fill was over, James and I were super bummed because he seriously was the best manager. He was fair and rewarded hard work and truly cared about his employees' satisfaction. He just made everything fun, even though we were working harder. We both looked up to Mike as a manager and a human being. We had the utmost respect for him and vowed to keep in touch when we parted ways. Well, fast forward a year or so, James and I ended up dating. We kept in touch with Mike, and he was so happy we ended up together because he thought we were both great people who deserved each other. We saw Mike a few more times and kept in touch over the years through social media. When James proposed and we started planning our wedding, we knew we wanted Mike to be in it. He was part of the trio before James and I even knew we would be together, and the three of us had a bond. We asked him to read something during our ceremony, and he accepted, expressing how honored he felt. Well, when it got to the day of the wedding, Mike was nowhere to be seen. We kept calling him as the ceremony was quickly approaching, and finally James got a hold of him. Mike told him that he couldn't get out of work and wouldn't be able to make it. We were both taken aback a little, because the Mike we knew and looked up to would never bail like this and never even let us know. We figured that there had to be a reasonable explanation and were very disappointed, but the wedding had to go on. We had James' niece do the reading even though Mike's name was printed on the program. Well, fast forward again, a few more years. We had only spoken to Mike a handful of times since the wedding, but he had also taken the time to write a beautiful, lengthy recommendation letter in that time period. There were no hard feelings about the wedding, and James and I still shared the highest opinions of our friend. Then Mike kind of disappeared off of social media, and the next time we tried calling him, his phone number had changed. James and I exchanged sentiments of concern and hoped he was doing okay, but it didn't go much past that. One day, James got a random call from a number that wasn't on his contact list. He answered it, and it turned out to be Mike. So he put it on a speakerphone so I could say hello too. We had our brief pleasantries, but then Mike got into the reason for his call. He wanted to know if he could stay with us for a day or two. My reaction was, of course, but James shot me a sharp look, so I added, well, let us discuss, and we'll call you back. Before concluding the call, James inquired about what was going on. Mike said that he was living with his father to take care of him because he was terminally ill, but that he couldn't stay there another night because he checked the camera footage in their home and saw his dad on tape standing over him with a knife while he slept. When the call ended, James said he thought something was off. I didn't get why he'd instantly be that suspicious. I mean, the story was insane and all, but it was Mike. James said something like, we haven't heard from him in forever, and now he's calling us for a favor? He lives 2 hours away, and we're the ones he calls? Why wouldn't he just seek help from someone closer? He has family in the area too. I agreed that it was odd, and it definitely conjured up a lot of questions, including why were there even cameras inside the house? But still, I didn't like the idea of leaving Mike hanging if he was truly out of options. I told James we should call back and probe a little more. When we called back, James asked if it would be easier for someone closer to help him out, and asked about family in the area. Mike gave a vague explanation on why everyone in his life turned against him. Then with the most mopey, disappointed voice, he said it was okay if we couldn't help him, that he understood what was going on and wouldn't bother us anymore. James and I both looked at each other and said we'd call him right back. We quickly discussed that this was all very strange, but that he would have to be pretty desperate to contact us for help. We acknowledged that his little bit about understanding if we were unable to help was meant to manipulate us, and we felt conflicted about everything, but ultimately decided a few days couldn't hurt. We called him back and told him that he could come, and figured we'd give him the address, and that would be that. He then said he no longer had a vehicle and would need to be picked up. We asked about him catching an Uber, and he said he had no money that he could access at that moment, which we didn't pry him on. It was getting a little late, and it was a long drive to his location, so we asked if there was anywhere he could stay for the night, and we could make the trip in the morning. He said he would just sleep on a park bench or something, which again, we knew was meant to manipulate us, but we didn't cave on this one. We asked where we should pick him up the following day, and he gave us his dad's address. Immediately after we got off the phone, we were like, what the fuck has been going on with Mike that has ostracized him from his family and friends and caused him to lose his car? He had been making 4 times our salary when we first met him. He had a brand new car, and now he didn't have enough money for an Uber? We went and picked him up the next day, and I got out and ran up to him and gave him a hug. He seemed oddly unresponsive to my affection, so I just shrugged him off and showed him to the front passenger seat where I'd been sitting. He was super tall, so I let him sit up there, and I hopped in the back. When we got to our house, we showed him the guest room, and he put his things down and immediately asked if we could take him to the grocery store. James said he was done driving for the day, so I said I would take him, but commented that I thought that he didn't have money on him. He told me that he had food stamps, which there was no way he would be qualified for with his old job, so I knew something was up, but I wasn't going to dig into the personal details of his finances. So I logged it in my mind and kept my mouth shut. You might be thinking, it just sounds like someone fell on hard times, and that's basically Mike's story as well. But it was just very vague in important areas, and full of story after story of people that were determined to destroy him for no known reason whatsoever. 1 or 2 bad eggs is believable, but no one is the innocent victim in every scenario. He was telling us that he had no idea why his life has fallen apart and why those close to him seemed to turn on him out of nowhere, or why so many people were out to get him without seeming to have any motivation. 2 nights turned into a week, and finally James asked what Mike's plan was. Mike acted hurt and said that he would be gone in the morning. We told him that he didn't need to leave immediately, but we would like to have some kind of idea of his plans for going forward. That night in bed, James and I discussed it and decided we would tell Mike he could stay as long as he needed if he wanted to help around the house and keep his room relatively clean, because it contained several antique items of James' mother. We were also going to ask him to help me with some entrepreneurial decisions, as Mike had claimed to be a totally self-made, successful entrepreneur before this. Streak of bad luck, series of fortunate events, and had recently been laid off. We presented our offer the next day, and Mike excitedly accepted. We thought it was going to be a rewarding trade-off for both parties. Now, this story isn't about my marriage, and I'm not going to go too far into the wealth of problems James and I had, but a little info will be necessary. James was always highly critical of me, and often talked down to me. He seemed to have nothing but negative opinions. I wasn't perfect, but I wanted to be loved, and worked my ass off for James' approval. I was continually trying to make him happy, but no matter what I did, I would fail in his eyes. After a few weeks, Mike clearly started to see some cracks in our marriage, despite the fact that James toned it down in Mike's presence. Trying to be a good wife, I acted like all was fine in front of Mike, and never mentioned any dissatisfaction in my marriage. Mike and I started to spend a lot of time alone in our entrepreneurial pursuits. He was supposed to be teaching me the tricks of the trade within several avenues of making money, but we kept coming out with little success. He had excuses and explanations for why his wisdom didn't seem to be progressing us forward at all, but he was someone I greatly looked up to as a professional and a friend, and believed that it would all pay off soon, like he said. After living together for weeks, enough talking among all of us had been done to start noticing weird contradictions to many of the things Mike had told us, but he always worded things in a way that left a slight amount of room for doubt. If you were to question any of it, there was never a way to straight up catch him in a lie. Mike also wasn't fulfilling his end of the deal at home, and kept saying he'd take his turn to do the dishes and such, but probably only did it once or twice, and he completely trashed the guest room. Not only was there garbage everywhere, but he left food and drinks, and they would be lost in the sea of clothes and trash, and we could smell things rotting. There's a melted tub of ice sitting on his bedside table for weeks. I didn't care as much as James did, and suggested we remove his mom's things from the room, but I did agree that it was disrespectful. Meanwhile, things were getting more and more icy with James and I, and one day when I was out with Mike on a job, I broke down in tears about how much I was hurting and about how James treated me. Mike offered words of comfort and reluctantly admitted that he picked up on how mean James could be, and said he was very sorry and that I didn't deserve it. Mike having been possibly the only witness I have ever had to what I had been going through in my marriage, this was amazingly validating. Mike agreed that it was incredibly unjustified, but made me a promise not to tell James that I said anything, because he didn't want to appear like he was taking sides. The next day, Mike had once again volunteered to take turns doing the dishes, so I didn't do them. I hate doing dishes, and happily left them for Mike when he assured me that he would handle it. Well, Mike got a call informing him that his dad didn't have long to live, so he wanted to see him. James didn't seem at all interested in helping, so I volunteered to take him and stay for moral support, and we headed out. Mike started telling me that his dad had dementia and makes up weird things, so he's advised not to take anything to heart. He cited a few examples of things he'd previously said, and they were more like accusations. One of them being that Mike had stolen all the money in his savings, but really couldn't reconcile the vast difference between the Mike I met 8 years ago before and someone that would rob his dying father. While visiting his dad, I didn't say much, and I didn't want to insert myself into a private family moment. but I kept noticing things that were weird. Like his dad was fully conscious and talkative, and he didn't seem like a dying man at all. He even asked us to get in Burger King in the middle of it all. I kept trying to justify things in my head, like who am I to say a dying man can't want a final meal at Burger King? A few hours later, James called, irate that I had left without doing the dishes that Mike had promised to do. He chewed me out and threatened a divorce, which is always his go-to to try to whip me into shape, and having recent affirmation from Mike that I wasn't the only one that saw James' emotional abuse, I said, fine, divorce won't be thrown in my face anymore, so divorce it is. Back in Mike's dad's room, his dad was yelling about the money and such, and Mike looked at me in a way to signal the dementia was talking. I started to really question what happened with his dad and if he was really even dying. But it wasn't something I could just really handle investigating at the moment, given that I had just separated from my husband. When we left the hospital, Mike's dad was still alive and eating candy bars. I had nowhere else to go, so I went back home and slept upstairs on the couch. I didn't speak to James for 2 whole days, and then Mike said that he had talked to his mom and I could stay there for a week. I wondered why his mom wasn't the one helping him if they were in contact and on good terms, but I just accepted the offer. I couldn't take being in that house anymore. Mike said that he was going to go with me and stay there too, which I thought looked really bad, but he said he spoke with James and that he understood and was fine with it. I spent an entire week crying and talking to Mike about how I felt, and he even woke up in the middle of the night with me and if I woke up and started spiraling downhill. He made no advances on me or anything of the sort. After the week, I wanted to stay with my parents, and Mike went back to stay with James. I eventually saw them both when I came over to get some things, and in talking with James, he was very much ready for Mike to leave. They barely seemed to talk, and didn't seem on good terms whatsoever. One night, I got the weirdest impulse to ask James if Mike ever said anything about me that he made a promise not to tell me. James hesitated for a second, but said yes. Through a series of questions, we inched through both of our experiences with Mike. He had been playing into our rapid declining marriage and using everything he observed against us. He had been going out and teaching me things about money, and he did the same thing he did as my boss those years before. Told me my strengths and complimented my ability to catch on to things quickly. We didn't have much success, but it was very obvious not on account of me. However, he was going back and feeding James terrible opinions of me, claiming we weren't making any money because I was so dense and hard to teach. Mike would also comment on the very same thing he told me that were unacceptable that James did, except he would tell James he doesn't know how he would live with someone like me, and that he would go insane. He was carefully and strategically forcing our marriage to fall apart by exacerbating our personal fears and insecurities and systematically violating and encouraging our resentment for one another. He did this in such a way that neither of us doubted his sincerity for a moment, until I finally got a weird feeling and decided to ask that night. And even more then, I didn't really anticipate finding out that he had been two-faced and manipulative to that extreme. James kicked him out that night, and neither of us had talked to him again, as far as I know. I haven't spoken to James in a year and a half. I proceeded with the divorce because even though Mike was an insincere piece of shit, he caused me to get enough distance from James that I was able to see that I deserved much better. Last I heard about Mike was from his mom, who called to see why he had been asked abruptly to leave James' house. I told her what he had done, and she didn't seem surprised. I asked if she was aware of any mental problems he might have, and she said she didn't want to betray her son by giving details, but that he isn't right in the head. I asked about several of the traumatic events that Mike claimed to be a victim of, and she said there's never been any evidence that any of that really happened. I don't know why he actively initiated the final downfall of my marriage, because I never felt it was an attempt to be with me. I don't get what his motivations or gain would have been. Mike's mom texted me a few days after he left James' house to tell me that he had been admitted to a psychiatric facility. It wouldn't be out for a long time, but she wouldn't elaborate. So former boss turned friend turned delusional sociopath. Let's not meet again.